let's talk about outer space and let's talk about um, fertility. I mean, gosh, these are topics that I didn't think we'd be connecting on the show, let alone ever. Why is this topic so important right now? Why should we be paying attention to it?
I think we should pay attention because there is a paradigm shift taking place, driven both by money and by science. And the shift is that for decades, NASA really was focused on let's just try to get men into space safely and get them back. And now you have this influx of money from big companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin that are talking about commercial space flight, bringing lots of people, not just elite astronauts, to space and staying there for longer periods of time. And once you think about putting humans someplace for a long time, you have to think about reproduction.
So, who are the leaders now in this race that you've started to learn about?
Well, look, there are a lot of researchers, some from some of these big companies, some from smaller companies, and some from the academic world who are thinking about the health of astronauts and just trying to ask the big questions. So, you have a startup in the Netherlands that I wrote about in the story called Spaceborne. They're trying to develop IVF in space. You have a group of ethicists who are working with some of the companies like Blue Origin and others, not on embryos per se, but on what would be some ethical guidelines. And one of them, said to me that in doing some consultations, a company did raise the question of, can we do human embryo research in space? What would be the ethics of it?
Hmm. And what is the answer to that question? Let's go to the ethical portion of all this.
Yeah, there are so many ethical questions. I mean, embryos, right? We all sort of understand that it's not just, any old collection of cells. It's very special. It has a special moral status for many people because it could become a future child. And so you want to think about like how to do research in that arena. It's very controversial even on Earth, and there are special guidelines when we do any kind of research on embryos. And there aren't existing guidelines for space research in this area at all. So they have to develop them. It's a big topic of conversation.
Hmm. What did you ultimately find over the course of your reporting? I mean, is it possible to have babies in outer space? What are the challenges to it? And look, there's no gravity. I mean, I presume that has an impact, right?
Yes, yes, we definitely need some form of gravity. At least that's the way we've developed. Look, there haven't been any efforts to create human babies in space, but there's been a lot of research on trying to create babies in space from animals. There were some Japanese researchers that got some fish to mate on a space shuttle, and there were some Russians, researchers that sent some rats into space to see if they would mate. They had, they didn't have such great success with the rats, and there've been a lot of
What about
mice.
the fish? What about the fish?
The fish, they did succeed in getting them to mate. In fact,
Okay.
I've been told that there's actually a video online that you can still access. It was decades ago, but they put it online, the Japanese researchers, if anyone wants to dig that up to look at fish mating in space. But fish and even mice and rats, that's not us, right? And it's only recently that, you've had more studies about looking at human sperm and what happens to that in space, and human eggs in space, that's not been done by NASA yet.
And I do wonder. I mean, how far a prospect is it based on what you found? We have all these discussions about life in outer space. There's so much that we got to get to, but I mean, is this realistic? Are there companies that are actually moving fast towards this?
I mean, fast. Like, there are companies that are sort of studying the beginnings of this and trying to get together experiments that they can put on some of these commercial spaceships. Yes. But trying to create a baby in space right now, it's not scientifically known if we can do that. But
Hmm,
there are efforts to study aspects of that process in space. So
hmm.
it is moving forward in that sense. And I think the message that I was given by all the different, both the business people and the researchers and the ethicists, is if we want to establish ourselves for any period of time and space, we can no longer ignore the question of reproduction in space. It's such a fundamental core identity of being human. It's such an essential part of our human identity that if you're going to try to sell the idea that we can settle in space, you have to do research on this. You have to make it one of the most important pieces of your agenda. And there are some who say that the whole idea of putting us in space for long periods of time will fail ultimately if you can't come up with an answer to this question.
I think it's just on a very practical level. I think it's quite remarkable that people in the world on planet Earth are getting paid to answer questions like this, not just about can we exist in outer space, can we set up life, but can we grow life on outer space? I mean, it's really fascinating. I think that there are pockets of Silicon Valley that are dedicated to this. Last question for you. What do you think this says about health and science in Silicon Valley in 2026 and the big questions that it is focused on? You've just joined the information a couple months ago. We're going to have you on the show more and more, by the way, because I think your topics are so fascinating to talk about. But as it relates to the topics that you are looking to cover as a health and science reporter, what do you think this says about that?
Look, I think the information has been ahead of, the curve in identifying the fact that there is a moment happening in Silicon Valley, a cultural moment where the money, the resources, the biggest players, the biggest names, they want to change the way science is being done. They want to change the way health and science is being done. They've invested already in many companies that are going to change the way fertility is done, that are looking at embryo editing and other futuristic technologies on Earth. So it doesn't surprise me, and it actually is emblematic of what's happening overall in Silicon Valley, that of course they're going to turn to fertility in space. They're already changing fertility on Earth. So of course they're going to look at fertility in space.
Great. Well, Amy, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Amy Dockser Marcus, our health and science reporter here at The Information.